Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rachel Wesson, and I am the Events and Communications Specialist at CLTC. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 5th Annual UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity Research Exchange. For those of you in the audience who may be a little bit unfamiliar with CLTC, the Research Exchange is our flagship annual event where we showcase some of the incredible interdisciplinary work of the CLTC research community through a series of short research talks covering a diverse spectrum of cybersecurity related topics. So this year, under the banner of our theme, Fostering Foresight, we are thrilled to also feature 2 panels on the agenda. In these talks, we'll be joined by cybersecurity leaders from industry and academia who will come together to discuss how they're supporting the next generation of multidisciplinary public interest technologists and share how they balance long-term cybersecurity planning with the urgent needs of the moment. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome CLTC's Executive Director, Anne Cleveland, to the Zoom stage to help us kick things off with a few words. Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hello and welcome, everyone. We're delighted that so many of you could make it today. As Rachel said, this is the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity's 5th Annual Research Exchange. I'm Anne Cleveland, the Executive Director of the Center, and I'm so excited about our agenda today. It's full of talented researchers and illustrious panelists. I hope everyone will find today's conversations both really fun and thought-provoking. Folks in the audience who know us at CLTC will know that we describe cybersecurity as everything where humans and machines intersect that is important enough to be called security. I think the presentations today are right at the heart of humans and technology, and emblematic of 2 key tenets of CLTC. We focus on the future of cybersecurity, looking a little bit over the horizon to help equip people and organizations with foresight. We also work to expand who participates in and has access to cybersecurity. So this is always such a special event because it's an opportunity to get a sneak preview of works in progress. So thanks in advance to the presenters, especially for sharing early findings with the audience, typically unpublished yet. And we'll count ourselves successful today if we've strengthened the bridge between cutting edge academic research and cybersecurity challenges that practitioners that are joining us today from industry, from government, from civil society are grappling with on the ground. This is, of course, a 2-way endeavor. So my challenge to the audience today is just to encourage everyone to make a connection today that you can follow up offline. And hopefully we will all be doing this together in person next year. And so the last thing I'll say is actually something I say every year at the Research Exchange, but I'll continue to say it. The work of CLTC's grantees and researchers and all of the cybersecurity practitioners in the audience today is more important than ever. Since we founded CLTC, the threat landscape is evolving faster. Adversaries continue to have limitless creativity, and digital technology has literally reached into every aspect of human life. So thanks to all of you for what you do. And without further ado, I think, Rachel, I will hand it over to our first set of researchers, Jackie Ho and David Ng.
Hi, my name is Jackie Ho. I'm a MICE alumni.
Hi, I'm David Ng, also a MICE alumni.
We'd like to share with you our project, Gamification for Cybersecurity Educations. Whenever we talk about cybersecurity educations, we think of books, articles, or videos. Sometimes they are not a very effective kind of for technical training, as this is a one-way learning. We also notice the trend of applying gamifications in different industries to attract the young generations. For example, Robinhood in investment and Fitbit in fitness.
Can we apply gamification to teach cybersecurity. One hypothesis we had was, can primary school children learn basic cybersecurity concepts through playing games?
Some research has been done previously on gamifications. This time around, we took a brand new approach. We want to see whether the community will be able to come up with some interesting game. And we proved that we can crowdsource high quality and innovative mini games through the community with very few resources. Here, I would like to thank again CLTC for the sponsorship. Without that, we won't be able to conduct this experiment. So what we have done, we organized a 2 weeks game jam or game development contest. We invite the community to participate. We have people, developers from all over the world. And in the end, we have some result we will show you later.
After a successful game jam that resulted in a number of games, we now plan to utilize the first place game jam winner in the next step of our project. What we want to do now is recruit a handful of primary school children with the age ranging from 8 to 9 years old, just before they begin grasping computer concepts. We wanted to see if we can teach them better password habits, concepts through playing mini games, again, that we sourced through the game jams. We were very fortunate that the first place winner was a password mini game. We would study to see if students would create a stronger, more complex password after playing the mini game. So you can imagine, we will have two groups of students. One group that has never played the mini game, and the other who has played our password mini game. And at the end, we invite them to see if it made any changes on how secure or how complex the password that they create to secure a very important account. Is a stronger and a more complex password creation correlated to the duration of playing the game? Does it matter? Nevertheless, we would like to share with you the cybersecurity game jam winner now, called Cryptic Clash.
All right, thanks, David. So before that, I want to show you the result of our game jam. So within 2 weeks' time, so from nothing, we received 43 entries. We have 43 games. They are all online. They are all free. You can go at any time. If you want to learn cybersecurity, you can play these games and get a feeling how it works. Here is one of the games that we talk about, and is about teaching you how to construct a complex password. You can see on the right-hand side is the length, and or the you want to replace some characters, and then right after that, you would the game will ask you to fight against with another password to see which one is stronger, and if you have a weaker password, you will lose the game. So if you have stronger, you can pass it on to the next level. We put a QR code here. If you really want to try it now, you can do so. But we prepare a short video clip to show you how it works with this game.
Hope you enjoyed our video. And now we look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, David. Hey, guys. So while we're waiting for the audience to put in a couple questions into the Q&A, I'll go ahead and kick us off and just ask for what was some of the feedback that you've gotten from folks who have played the game?
Yeah, I can start first, and David, you can chip in after that. So we do have invite some folks to try this game. They find that it's very refreshing because they have never seen this before. Most likely when we talk about cybersecurity game, they will find this is kind of like boring game quiz like some kind of question and answer, or maybe just multiple choice. But this time around, they learn in a different way. It's like really a real game, but in a context with cybersecurity.
Yeah, I had my actually I mentioned in the video, hoping to get a focus group. So my son, who's 8 years old, he tried playing it, and he really liked interacting with the music, and he really wanted to know why his password that he created at first, I think he put A, and why that was a weak password. And I said, well, you try to add some different letters and numbers and some special characters, then maybe you can get to the next level. So I would say at first, he seemed to have a lot of fun with it. And I think, as Jackie mentioned, maybe making more fun interactive games is one way to kind of bridge that gap and introduce folks to cybersecurity.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone, for putting some questions into the Q&A. A good question here. Why are we focusing here on passwords as opposed to multi-factor authentication? Can either of you speak to that?
Oh, yeah. So for this experiment, we want to start it in a very easy way, because they are full-time game developer. They are not cybersecurity professional. They have no idea what the multi-factor authentication is. So we want to give them like very easy topic that they should be able to know. They should, just a little bit of study or research. They should be able to create some game. This is a proof of concept. So next round, if we get the funding, if we have the chance, then we will give them a more difficult topics for them to work on.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for asking that question. I want to say that initially the research that we did was a capstone project for the Mike's program, and we had a panel of judges judging the 43 entries of games. We had a lot of different criteria of what makes a fun interactive game. One criteria I want to mention is that these are mini games designed to play between 3 to 5 minutes, and our top grand prize winner just happened to be a password type game. But there were a lot of other games as well. I invite you all to try out the other ones and maybe convince us that maybe we should have chosen another grand prize winner.
Thank you both. Really quickly, with just a minute left here, I wonder if either of you could speak to the breakdown of the demographics of students who played the game.
So the student, so David and I, we will have two groups of students. So from my side, I will have age 12 to 18. So those are like secondary school students in Asia. So so we will ask them to play the game and try and to give us feedback to see whether they can learn cybersecurity concept through the games.
Yeah, and my focus group, I'm trying, I'm still recruiting, would be primary school kids, typically maybe between 3rd and 4th grade. That would be the next part of our research. Initially, as Jackie mentioned, we were seeing if we can first crowdsource these type of games, and then we successfully did so. And now we want to see if these games make an impact, or at least bridge that gap to teach kids cybersecurity. So hopefully next time we'll have interesting and exciting results for you all.
All right, thanks so much, David and Jackie. Jackie coming all the way from Singapore at 1 a.m. over there. Thanks so much for joining us today. I see a couple of other great questions in the Q&A. If either of you were able to hang out, maybe type some of those answers in there, that would be great. But fortunately, we do have to keep it moving along. So thanks, Jackie. Thanks, David. And next up, our next talk of the day comes from Allison Post, and we will play her talk now.
Hi, my name is Allison Post, and I'm a professor in the Political Science Department at UC Berkeley. I'm here to talk about some research funded by the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity that I've been conducting with some colleagues across different fields. So our work has focused on the cybersecurity of what we might call smart city technologies. And by this term, we mean technologies that are utilized by local governments that involve interconnected devices that draw on real-time data. They're usually intended to increase the efficiency and transparency of local government operations. We asked two related questions. The first is which of these various technologies constitute the greatest cybersecurity risks? And the second is how voter support for investments in cyber protection can be improved. With respect to the first question, we're responding to a set of debates within the urban policy community that really pit techno-optimists against techno-pessimists. The optimists think about all the potential advantages of integrating new technology for public administration, whereas the pessimists are really focused on concerns about privacy and particularly cyber attack. And so what we're doing in this project is really trying to assess the extent to which cyber technologies, smart city technologies actually vary pretty considerably in the risks that they pose. The results of our work have already been published in a public report that's posted on the CLTC website for those of you that want to learn more. So the starting point for our analysis is basically to think about why technologies might vary. And we can think about this in three ways. The first is that technologies may vary in terms of the underlying vulnerability of the particular technology that's used. And so this can relate to the size of the attack surface, the potential entry points for cyber attacks, can also stem from complexity in the systems. The second is that across technologies, we're likely to see different levels of interest from potential threat actors, and particularly capable threat actors like nation states. And then third, across these different technologies, they're going to be associated with impacts of cyber attacks that really vary pretty dramatically. So what we did was reach out to cybersecurity experts with a survey in which we asked them to rank 9 different smart city technologies on each of these 3 dimensions. The survey was distributed within professional associations that have many cybersecurity experts as members. And then we did complementary case study work. To briefly summarize our findings, what we found is that across these 9 technologies, basically the same technologies were ranked as particularly vulnerable in technical terms, as attractive to nation states for cyber attacks, and impactful if a successful attack was to occur. And so these top 3 were emergency and security alert systems, street video surveillance systems, and smart traffic lights and signals systems. So we could imagine, because you have this confluence of technical vulnerability and interest in attack by capable actors, that these are the ones that local governments should be more concerned about and think harder about cyber protections if they do choose to move forward with adopting these technologies. Whereas for a bunch of other ones, cyber experts were really much less concerned about cyber attacks. And I should state that these differences are significant in statistical terms, even with the small sample of respondents that we had. The second question that we address is how we can encourage or improve public support for expenditures on cyber protections for infrastructure agencies. And here what we were interested in doing is basically looking at the effect of changing the time frame over which attack probabilities, the probabilities of cyber attacks, are presented to members of the public. We conducted a survey within a representative sample of 7,000 California voters to assess the effect of this intervention. So let me make this a bit more concrete. In our survey, we asked individuals whether they would be willing to support a $2 surcharge on their monthly water bill to finance system upgrades to the IT system to protect it against cyber attacks. And in this prompt, we changed the time frame over which the probability of an attack was stated, while keeping the probability essentially equivalent in quantitative terms. So we stated the probability of our 1-year versus 5-year versus 10 versus 30-year time frame. What we found is that stating risks over a 30-year time frame with a concomitantly higher probability was much more effective. with these voters than a 1-year time frame, whereas the 5 and 10-year time frame was really no different than a 1-year time frame. And this suggests that individuals really register in cognitive terms the probability of attack to a much greater extent when the number is larger, simply because it's stated over a longer time frame. Now, this effect was strongest amongst those who did not consider cyber attacks to be particularly likely at the outset of our survey. It was not effective, however, amongst those who identified as Republican or stated at the outset of our survey that they didn't trust their local water provider. So this is potentially a useful way to approach voters who are not particularly informed about cybersecurity issues, but it's not going to work with the full electorate, is what we learned through our survey. So thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and feedback during the Q&A.
All right. Hi there, Allison. How's it going? Thank you for your talk.
Looking forward to some questions.
All right. Yeah, looks like we have one in the chat right now that was submitted during your talk. It says, what problems are worth investigating, keeping an intersection of industry and policy in mind? Can you speak to that?
Which problems with risk? I guess I'm trying to understand what the question is getting at, and I don't have access to the question in my chat for some reason.
No worries, it's in the Q&A feature, but I'm afraid that that's all,
gotcha.
that's all that it says.
Okay. What problems are worth investigating? So here I would say actually that we all have different expertise to bear based on the field that we come from. And so as a political scientist, I'm better positioned to investigate topics that relate to public opinion about cybersecurity or organizational processes within local governments or other types of government agencies that are trying to figure out how to build support for these efforts, either among elected officials or among voters, et cetera. Then those who work in more technical fields will be actually kind of working on the actual technical solutions in terms of making technologies more robust potentially to cyber attacks. So I would say there are actually lots of opportunities to work on this issue, but where it makes sense to focus often depends on the expertise that we can bring to bear.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Allison. I'm afraid I do have to keep us moving to keep to schedule, but thanks so much for being here. And it looks like a question was just popped into the Q&A if you've got a few minutes before you have to run at 11 for your lecture to speak to that. But for more information on that report, folks, please head to the CLTC website and go to our publications tab, and you can read the report there. Okay, thanks so much, Allison. And now we're going to move into our next talk from Richmond Wong.
Hi, I'm Richmond Wong. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. Today, I'm talking about a project done in collaboration with James Pierce and Jason Valdez at the University of Washington that focuses on considering a broader range of people and social relationships that might affect privacy in smart home environments. When we think about potential privacy harms in smart homes with technologies like smart cameras or smart speakers, a lot of our attention focuses on the relationship between the main user or owner of the devices and how their data gets collected and used by the companies making these devices. And a lot of research is focused on helping users understand what data these devices collect, how companies use it, and the potential privacy harms that may result. However, these perspectives often assume that all users or data subjects are pretty similar and obscures how privacy can be mediated by social relationships among different types of users. So we make a distinction between primary users, those who have more control and access to smart home devices, and non-primary users, those who have less control over these devices. Our work highlights 3 potential social relationships among primary and non-primary users: parents and children, landlords and tenants, and residents and domestic workers. The privacy of non-primary users is strongly affected by the actions of primary users and what their social relationship is. So if you're a non-primary user, you likely don't have access to the actual device, and you may not have the social power to push back against the primary user's practices. In our research, we use scenarios to explore how privacy is impacted by relationships amongst primary and non-primary users. We worked with students at the University of Washington to create a set of scenarios imagining future smart home use cases. These scenarios try to evoke near future everyday uses that might be all right in some circumstances, but problematic in others. These were inspired by trends that are already happening, pushed out a little further into the future. So one example scenario for parents and kids is the out after curfew detector, repurposing smart security cameras that are generally used to keep intruders out to instead detect and report on whether kids are sneaking out at night. A scenario for landlords and tenants is the extreme lease enforcer, where smart cameras and microphones can precisely and strictly enforce rental agreements, such as the number of guests a tenant is allowed to have or making sure noise stays below a certain level. And the system can then automatically warn or fine tenants who violate those rules. A scenario for residents and domestic workers is Mood Check, which attempts to use a smart camera to detect the emotional state of a caregiver or nanny to evaluate whether they have the right temperament for the job. We share these scenarios with a range of smart home technology users who fit into one of these categories, and they reflected on a range of issues while looking at the scenarios, such as privacy and surveillance concerns, unintended effects or possible misuses, and situations where the scenarios might be appropriate or inappropriate. Often they reflected on how these scenarios tended to benefit the primary users at the expense of the non-primary users' privacy and agency. We found that people used a range of techniques to interact with the scenarios, including relating them to their own lives, looking at them from the viewpoints of different types of users, helping to fill in the scenarios by thinking about what social or technical preconditions would be necessary for these to come true, and imagining alternate scenarios, such as trying to invert the social relationships to come up with scenarios that might give the non-primary users more agency. So this work is important for a few reasons. First, it helps us learn about design scenarios as a foresight tool, helping us understand how users and everyday people might make sense of these potential future social and technical developments. Second, it helps us think in more complex ways about who has access to privacy. From a design perspective, as well as a law and policy perspective, this work suggests thinking more complexly about how different types of social relationships and power dynamics can create differential and unequal access to privacy and security. Today's talk fits into a broader set of projects, including interviews with smart home camera users to understand how and why they might use cameras in ways that surveil non-primary users and what types of privacy safeguards exist. And we're deploying the scenarios for different purposes, such as educating people or doing participatory scenario creation with people from diverse populations to understand how different communities may have unequal access to privacy and security. So thank you to all the students and collaborators who contributed to this work, and I'm happy to follow up with folks who want to talk more about this.
All right. Hey there, Richmond. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thanks so much for your talk. All right. We have a question for you in the Q&A. So regarding who has access to privacy, how can scenarios help us imagine new types of access to privacy? Any initial findings there?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So we're really interested in part in like the work that scenarios can do. Scenarios are often used as a part of kind of design processes or policymaking processes or business planning processes to think about, like what are the future outcomes that can happen. One of the things that we wanted to do is like use that as an opportunity to think a little more, to kind of push that a little more, right? And not just think of like, what are the different outcomes that could happen, but what if we really try to focus on different types of people at the center of these scenarios? So we could imagine, one of the interesting things when people reacted to these scenarios is kind of inverting that power dynamic a little bit and thinking about, what if children had were the primary agent who had privacy instead of the parents being able to control that relationship? Or what if tenants had the kind of more agency and more control over privacy decisions than the landlords who installed that technology? And so, given that we're a little free from the constraints of the present, we can kind of imagine alternatives in a pretty cool way.
Awesome. All right, thanks so much, Richmond. I am going to go ahead and start transitioning us into our first panel, but I do see another great question for you in the Q&A. If you're able to type an answer to that, that would be great. Awesome, thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to back to our Executive Director, Anne Cleveland, to get us started for this first panel. Anne, take it away.
Well, please join me in giving a virtual round of applause to our presenters. Thanks, everybody. We're going to turn now to our panel on the future of public interest cybersecurity clinics. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Andreen Soley, who is one of the most thoughtful people you will ever meet on issues of public interest technology, who participates in it, and how it is distinct from other endeavors. Andreen has been the director of the Public Interest Technology University Network at New America since 2018. She joined New America after 20 years of experience working in higher education and the nonprofit sector. We're thrilled to have her here to share her expertise and lead today's discussion. So Andreen, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction. I hope I can live up to what you've just said about me. I'm excited to participate in this conversation. The Public Interest Technology University Network, PITUN for short, is a network of 43 universities and colleges that are working to build out the field of public interest technology more broadly on campuses across the US. PITUN believes strongly in the need to connect students to the things they're learning in the classroom with the real world applications of their skills and knowledge out in the world. We're particularly keen to support and amplify projects that protect the most vulnerable among us online and offline. It's one of the reasons why public interest cybersecurity is so important, and we are happy to support the growth of these projects at universities and colleges, both within the network and outside of the network. So I'm excited to hear about the projects that some of our panelists are working on, and hopefully to learn some more from the chat. So let's get started with our panelists. Beginning with Lily Lin. Lily Lin is a graduate of UC Berkeley with degrees in physics, computer science, computer science, biology, as well as a master's in information management and systems from the School of Information. They are also an alum of the Citizen Clinic and Future of Cybersecurity Reading Group. Currently, they work as a project manager at Microsoft, working with the Microsoft Search, Assistant, and Intelligence Group. Tiffany Rad. Tiffany Rad teaches the Citizen Clinic Practicum at UC Berkeley School of Information, which provides students with real-world experience assisting politically vulnerable organizations and persons around the world to develop and implement sound cybersecurity practices. Tiffany is also the CEO and co-founder of Anatrope Inc., which develops wireless automotive technologies for the security and data analytics industry. And finally, Larry Susskind. Larry Susskind is a Ford Professor of Urban and Environmental Planning at MIT, where he also oversees the MIT Cybersecurity Clinic, providing students with opportunities to help defend American cities, towns, and hospitals that are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Welcome, welcome everyone.
Hi, Andreen.
Hi. Hi all. Let's start with you, Larry. Larry, can you give us a brief history of how the MIT Cybersecurity came to be, what types of students participate in it, and what you're most excited about that you're working on right now?
Sure. I started with a question that urban planners, which is the department I teach in, always have, which is how do we make sure infrastructure can work for those that need it most? And if you take a city perspective and talk about threats to critical urban infrastructure, cybersecurity is up at the top of the list right now. Yes, we have legislation pending to try to provide money to build more infrastructure, but urban infrastructure is under attack every day. Not all those attacks are successful, but we know that the levels of attacks are increasing. So we decided at MIT in the urban planning department to create a clinical teaching opportunity so that our students could participate with client communities, cities and towns. It turns out mostly in the Northeast, because we thought originally we'd be going to visit them face to face. We have a broader purview at the moment because we have been doing a lot of our work online with client communities. And so to prepare the students to do that, I needed to call on all of my MIT colleagues in computer science and management and other fields. And I put together 4 one-week modules with support of the America Foundation and Pitt UN, so that we could create an edX course that anybody could take, but in particular, our students could take. And at the end of the 4 weeks, 4 hours a week course, there's an exam, a multiple choice exam. And that exam's important because I can assure communities that say they would like help with the vulnerability assessment, that I'm sending them students that are prepared. Look, they've passed this exam after taking this 4-week course. And so we're now into the 4th or 5th cycle of working with client communities. Communities have found us, particularly in Massachusetts, through the state Mass Cyber Organization. And so there's no problem finding cities and towns that would like help, although we're also now trying to focus on hospitals. And there's no problem preparing students for 4 weeks. But then we have to provide assistance and oversight so that the teams of students working with the client communities go through a process of gathering information, checking the information, working with each community to see whether we can check off on a survey of questions. Are they doing the minimum that they need to be doing? Are they doing basic things effectively? And then on a confidential basis, we give a vulnerability assessment to each of these communities and suggest the kinds of things they might want to work on, even though we can't promise to do them all. We're mostly producing confidential vulnerability assessments for city agencies. The agencies then have to decide what help they're going to get from the consulting world or from other places to implement the improvements that they need to pursue. So the clinic will work with 3 or 4 agencies a semester, every semester. It's very exciting now because there's a coalition of cybersecurity clinics at other universities so that we can learn from each other and share information. The research question, and I'll be very brief, the research question at the top of the list for me and for the state of Massachusetts is, what would a minimum standard of care for cybersecurity look like that you would hold municipal governments to if you were going to offer them the equivalent of assistance if they were attacked? If you were the state, you're going to offer grants, you would want them to work toward meeting a minimum standard of care before they would be eligible for the assistance once they were attacked. I would argue the insurance companies should be doing the same thing, but unfortunately, they're not been interested in this discussion of minimum standard of care. They seem to be willing to sell anybody cybersecurity insurance, any municipality. So standard of care, what should it consist of? What is a minimum? How should that change for cities and towns of different size, or hospitals that serve different communities in different ways? My sense is we're coming closer to knowing what questions need to be addressed by a standard of care. We're in the process of surveying sets of places to see what the prevailing standard of care looks like. So sorry to go on, but that's the topic.
Thank you so much, Larry, for that very thorough overview. I want to bring in Tiffany. Tiffany, you instruct the public interest cybersecurity citizen clinic practicum course at Berkeley. Can you tell us about the kind of work the clinic is doing and the kinds of challenges the clinic clients are facing? What makes public interest cybersecurity different from other cybersecurity endeavors? I think Larry might have hinted at that, but I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, my background is working in the private sector. So I worked for companies with 100,000 employees. The company had created information technology and cybersecurity products, but those products are very expensive. So when a nonprofit group is looking at how do we do cybersecurity, not only is it a kind of a daunting task because there are so many threats out there, where to start is the question, and also some of the products that are sold and are beyond the budget for most of the nonprofits. So what we do in the clinic is we have politically vulnerable clients, and we do a security assessment for them and make recommendations that are practical and economical for them. And some of the clients that we've had in the past 2 semesters, this is my second semester teaching the clinic, is an organization that's a nonprofit that there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and there are many victims of the war, survivors, prisoners of war. So this nonprofit took records of their experiences, what had happened. So they were creating historical documents that there are a couple of universities in the Northeast are going to be analyzing. And they were often attacked, cyber attacked, and also misinformation and disinformation upon all of the clients we've had. This is a concern of theirs, is how do they combat that? How do they recognize that this is happening, what to do about it? So these are some of the challenges that we face with the clients that we have now. And what makes it different for some of the nonprofits is that the ones that we've worked with in the past couple of semesters have had no budget for cybersecurity, have not had cybersecurity before. So we step in really and have to do an assessment of all of both the technical, so the cyber capabilities that they have, what do they have set up for their network, what website, how was it built, what versions is it running? So we take a look at those things. But we also look at other things associated with security for these nonprofits, especially since the directors and the volunteers, excuse me, are at high risk of cyber attack. We look at and talk to them about the physical security they have in their offices, because some of them don't have very much, but they maybe store this information on site on a laptop in a building where they work. Or we look at some of the social media that they use to get information out to the funders. Like, are these, do they connect it? Sometimes they don't know not to connect their private social media accounts with the ones they use publicly for their nonprofits, or their private ones are not marked, their family social media is not locked down as private. So any type of adversary that's targeting them and trying to dox what that means is you get all this information in a malicious way and release their home address, phone number, all personal information, even pictures of their kids, that some of the directors working in these difficult areas really don't want that information becoming public. So we take a look using open source intelligence tools, what we can find, and then we make advising recommendations for them. We don't do any vulnerability scans. We don't pen test their networks. We are consultants. So we spend 6 weeks taking a look at different topics, everything from, like, next week is misinformation, disinformation, what is doxing, what can you do about it, how to lock down social media accounts that are more private and family oriented as opposed to for the nonprofit. And we look at things such as network security. And so it's technical as well as more of the social aspect too. And lastly, one of the things that we're going to be including in the curriculum is about surveillance. And a lot of their volunteers are heavily surveilled by governments in which they work. We have one client in Central America now that is very much surveilled. They're actually supporting a criminal case against 2 former generals of a military that were accused of mass murders in the 1990s and into 80s and 90s. And they're just facing trial now. And this nonprofit is very concerned about their cybersecurity because they're already under attack, because they're supporting these war criminals going to jail. So this is the kind of element that we have in Berkeley Cybersecurity Clinic. We have clients that are at very high risk for things happening online, but their physical security and giving recommendations of how to travel securely, how to use full disk encryption, what not to click on. So we have a training program that we found for free. Again, we try to make the tools very, very low cost or free that we recommend, but a training program on how to identify phishing emails. So basic cybersecurity, that's very different than what a lot of these students have experienced working for big companies in the San Francisco area. And where we start out with, okay, we have no budget. How can we help these organizations that very much need our help? So the work is very worthwhile. I enjoy it a lot, and I love seeing the students when they give their final presentations. The clients in the past have been so relieved that they know where to start. This huge topic has suddenly become something more manageable, that we give practical and not tech speak recommendations. And we don't say, hey, you're going to need a $100,000 budget to do this. The last semester, I think the budget was probably $100 a year for the recommendations that we had. So that's what we do. And those are some of the challenges we face.
Thank you for that, Tiffany. One thing before I move on to Lily, just ask you a quick question about who are the types of students who hear cybersecurity? They have a particular set in their head.
The past 2 semesters we have had in the Mike's program, all with cybersecurity backgrounds, but next semester it's going to be different. We found that we're looking for students that have backgrounds also in law and policy. And these types of backgrounds will help round out the team, because sometimes when we're looking at legislation such as European privacy legislation, having someone who has a different type of background to cybersecurity to do that analysis and to make some recommendations for the client would be fantastic. So we're branching out and bringing in more students from different programs at Berkeley, and we're very excited for this influx of some new students and some new opinions to the team, because really looking at what you need to accomplish, it's not just all technical. You got to look at the human elements of, like, how are people using this cybersecurity? If we create a system that's too technical, too hard to access, no one's going to use it. And it's kind of useless that way. But like human machine interface, people with these types of backgrounds, it's different. So we want more opinions based on this. So that's why we're expanding the program. It used to be like this at Berkeley, but the program moved to the Mike's program. But now we're inviting more students to apply for the semester starting in January.
Thanks for that. It's really good to know that, because I think coming out of the nonprofit space, I know that it attracts a wide variety of folks. Lily, you bring a unique perspective to the panel as one of the first Citizen Clinic alumni. How did your experience with the clinic and exposure to public interest in cybersecurity influence your career path and your work in industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely would say that I wouldn't still be at Microsoft if it wasn't for the clinic, because I was a former engineer after graduating from Berkeley the first time in Silicon Valley, went through a lot of tech startups, did the whole engineering bit, and then came to the information school at Berkeley because I felt like that was an inadequate knowledge base of, I can build stuff, but why are we building it? For what reasons? And I definitely had the experience of working for startups and making some rather large cybersecurity decisions as a junior engineer for the entire organization, and arguing back very suspicious asks. So, like, to me, the Citizen Clinic experience is really important to me, because that was how I was able to interact with. So my particular research interest is on groups that are traditionally marginalized, so disadvantaged groups. So to me, there's a lot of classes I want to take at Berkeley, but I think I had like 3 classes that like conflicted with it. But I chose to do Citizen Clinic because it was just like, this is what I'm really interested in. I want to understand how technology impacts marginalized populations and how we can build for it. Now, at Microsoft, as a product manager, essentially, we call it program management, but as a product owner, I don't directly work on security, but the group that I work for is, this will probably be more obvious than what it's currently called, which I work for the team that's formerly known as Cortana, which I won't go into, but you can imagine a little bit kind of the decisions that we've made as product owners and thinking about security, thinking about what's creepy and not creepy, why we would say we're the team formerly known as Cortana. We still, so kind of what Citizen Clinic taught me is that I think the clinics are doing great work, but the thing that we keep coming back to is that technology needs to be easy. Technology needs to be easy for the users, and they need to be designed with the problems in mind for people. And so the answers isn't in how do we essentially like make these technologies that are built with different intentions in place work for people with like different economic needs and different security issues. Like we're never going to have products that don't have severe gaps for disadvantaged groups where they need to essentially have the funding to make up for that gap, unless we're designing future technology to think about the future infrastructure, the future needs. So I'm still exploring and learning, but the reason I chose to go with a large company after my experience at Citizen Clinic is, one of the things that we found at Citizen Clinic is a lot of people use Microsoft products, Google products. They're stuck into these technology silos where we can say like, hey, there's this robust, really great open source thing, go do it. But unless they have their own engineer, their own IT team, like that, those are not real options unless, if like it gets back to a budgeting issue. So what I'm really interested in and kind of what I'm seeing I guess in a way, like continuing with the research practicum kind of ideology is I'm at Microsoft because I'm really interested in, being a part of this kind of startup-y team within it, as we're building kind of what we see as the future intelligence of Microsoft. I'm a huge advocate for like bringing in disadvantaged populations and user research practices. And what I'm really curious about is two parts. One, how much can product owners and product managers play a role in creating future products that take into those things in consideration, and how much can we get it to align with business interests? Because that's the usual reason these things don't happen. And then the second part of my interest is as a tech employee in a large company instead of a startup, how much impact can I have trying to pitch for and guide product development that really feel my interests, which are designing for disadvantaged populations as an employee within a large company. Because my previous experience is it's really hard to get that to happen if you're operating as a nonprofit or a student or an academic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think what I really liked hearing is that you have to consider the needs of the population first before you begin to design, right? And so it's really helpful to hear that through line through all of the speakers. And so I want to throw a question out to everyone as we come to the end of this panel. I'm going to start back again with Larry, and the question is, as someone who has pioneered public interest cybersecurity clinics, what advice do you have for people interested in starting a clinic? Just a couple of tips for someone who said, this is great, I just want to figure out how do I get started. So Larry, go ahead.
Someone needs to take the lead who has the idea that this is part of fulfilling their institution's social responsibilities. And this is not just an opportunity for technical training for people who need to learn stuff. And if you understand that we're talking about institutions like colleges and universities, but also large companies, have social responsibilities, and one of them is to assist those in enhancing their cybersecurity who don't presently know how or have the capacity to do that, then what they're doing is partnering with those places to build their capacity. And if you start with someone who thinks that they're doing this for that reason, and you're looking for partners who you want to work with to build capacity, the rest will take care of itself.
Thank you. And I want to stay on time, but I just want to give Tiffany 1 second to give a little advice for anyone else who's thinking about a clinic.
If you're thinking about starting a clinic, make sure that you create a team where there's someone who's a good communicator as well, leading the team, both from the student groups and an instructor, because sometimes when you go to a nonprofit that's they're representing a group that's already been marginalized and already had perhaps concerns about government surveillance, things like that. It's someone that can communicate to them to create the trust relationship, because asking them like, hey, I'm going to bring in a group of 18 students to take a look at all your vulnerabilities. It's something that takes trust. So it's something that you need to create a team that's diverse enough that can create that trust relationship and maintain it throughout the course of the semester.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you, Lily. And thank you all for participants, panelists, as well as listeners. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about Cybersecurity Clinic. And over to our host.
Great. Thank you so much, Andreen. Thank you, Lily, Tiffany, and Larry. That was a fascinating discussion, a lot to talk about in just 25 minutes. So I appreciate you both and all of you accepting the challenge. I think there's a couple of questions still in the Q&A. One might be for Tiffany. I think one might be for Lily. If either of you are able to hang out and get those answered in the Q&A, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm happy to follow up offline and we can make sure that we address those then. Yeah, for anyone in the audience who's interested in joining, this group of people or group of institutions who are working at the forefront of cybersecurity, clinical education, please feel free to send me a message directly in the chat and I can follow up with more information. But all right, I hope everyone's enjoyed this first hour of talks. We're going to jump right back into the agenda, keep things moving along for our next jam-packed hour of our research exchange. So next up, we have a talk from Emma Lurie. We'll cue that up now.
Hi there, I'm Emma Lurie, a third-year PhD student at the UC Berkeley School of Information. Today I'm going to be sharing some of the high-level takeaways from my CLTC-funded research assessing and developing the online election information infrastructure. From directions to polling places to information about candidates' positions, the public relies on technology platforms like Google and Facebook to help navigate political participation. As a result, technology platforms are increasingly entangling themselves with the existing online election information infrastructure like Ballotpedia, a Secretary of State's website, news outlets, and local endorsements. Platforms are not only entangled with the online election information infrastructure, but they're also actively reshaping it, altering how voters access and retrieve information, and potentially affecting voters' trust in democratic institutions and processes. As technology platforms alter our online election information infrastructure, existing vulnerabilities are exacerbated and new vulnerabilities emerge. Today, I'll be sharing 2 case studies I've developed in the past year that speak to these challenges. The first centers on the idea that there are many legitimate reasons that constituents might need to contact their member of Congress, and that Google is an important way that people identify who their member of Congress is and helps mediate that communication. Yet Google search struggles to accurately resolve queries that seek to identify an individual's member of Congress. For example, the search query 94704 Congressperson, as you can see in this slide, turns up that the Congressperson for 94704 is Jerry McNerney. In fact, it's Barbara Lee. In this study, I find that 10% of searches that seek to identify a California local representative are likely to mislead information seekers about who their representative is. Factors of beyond looking at how often this happens, I'm also interested in why this happens. And factors identified in this breakdown include Google's heavy reliance on Wikipedia, the lack of authoritative machine parsable data about the identity of elected officials, and the search engine's relatively weak treatment of underspecified queries. We recommend steps in this paper and case study that Google can take to meet its stated commitment to providing high-quality civic information, and steps that information providers can take to improve the legibility and quality of information about congressional representatives available to search algorithms. Concretely, these suggestions include improving structured data on members of Congress's websites and Google leveraging the Google Civic Information API in these search results. The second case study focuses on a different election. This is about the 2020 election and the California ballot propositions. In the days leading up to that election, cybersecurity experts raised concern that people who sought information about the ballot propositions were being displayed biased information that misrepresented the underlying sources' positions on Google search engine result pages. In this case study, I conducted an algorithmic audit to investigate claims of search engine bias in the search results. I found that while the majority of search snippets do not take a clear stance towards or against the proposition, some official government sources, which should of course be neutral, appeared to take a stance on ballot propositions, not because of the underlying content on their pages, but because of the way the Google search text summarization algorithms were operating. What both of these examples illustrate are the ways that technology platforms, particularly Google Search, are changing the election information voters are shown and how these changes could potentially increase distrust in democratic institutions. This work highlights the vulnerabilities in our online election information. Previously, the research community has been primarily in a reactive position of finding and fixing data voids or correcting individual pieces of misinformation. My work helps shift our thinking to consider the interaction effects of technology platforms and existing online election information. This shift helps us better understand the online election information ecosystem, develop voter-centered measurement techniques, and considers the ways that we can be proactive about developing a robust online information infrastructure. Thank you so much.
Hey, Emma, how's it going?
Going really well.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's turn to the Q&A and see if folks have submitted anything. All right, a couple questions here. Understanding that this is preliminary work, what might voter-centered measurement techniques look like in practice?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. The algorithmic auditing community currently doesn't look at the most common queries that voters actually search to conduct this work. They often search for candidate names and just the title of the election. Much of my work has actually found is that voters don't know that much about elections, or political science research generally can tell you that as well, right? And so when you look at local races, which potentially, or I think is reasonable to assume that voters have to search more about local elections than they do about who's running for US president, that candidate names are actually a not very good thing to audit. So making sure that as we do voter-centered work, that we're actually looking at what voters are searching and what the issues they care about.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, another few questions actually in here. I'll just pick this first one. Emma, can you speak to your thoughts on whether there's a false stereotype against big tech for misinformation in elections?
Yeah, so I think misinformation, I thought the question was going towards bias, which is my pause. I don't think there is a false kind of narrative around misinformation in big tech. I think it is true that like Facebook or Google does not write misinformation and then post it. That's true, right? Users do. But I think if anything, the last few days and the testimony there has shown us that in fact, there is a history and around globally, especially a lot of my work is focused on the US, but I think as we look globally, it's even more true that big tech platforms have a huge misinformation problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Emma. Rapid fire, we have to keep it moving, but I do see some great questions in the Q&A. People interested in reading more about your work and where your paper might be published. A couple other questions there, if you're able to stick around and type out some answers to those folks, that would be great.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for your talk. Thanks. Okay, moving us right along. Next up, we have a talk from Laura Elizabeth Pathick, and we're going to cue that up now.
Hello, my name is Laura Elizabeth Pathick, and I'm a PhD student in social welfare here at UC Berkeley, and I'm grateful and excited to be talking to you all today. So I'm going to be presenting on my research that is focused on centering the health data, privacy, and security perspectives of safety net patients. So in partnership with UCSF, my research group here at Berkeley Social Welfare was in the last stage of developing an adaptive text messaging app to encourage physical activity among low-income minority patients. These patients are recruited from an urban safety net healthcare system here in the Bay Area. And we use the term safety net patients to encompass a group of patients who are low income, tend to be underinsured or uninsured, and are usually Medicaid or Medicare recipients, and are disproportionately racial and ethnic minorities. As we were wrapping up testing of the app, questions surrounding security and privacy implications of this sensitive patient data emerged within the research team because we were discussing our informed consent protocol. We were asking patients to reveal private sensitive information to retrieve aspects of the app personalization and to improve the machine learning algorithm, to inform the algorithm. Among those were step tracking data and location data. So although research participants control who can access their personal health information through consent in theory, and the study protocol had been approved by IRB, when we were discussing a process for ensuring a proper informed consent process, somehow some of us assumed patients did not care about the privacy implications of collecting their health and location data, and that most patients will consent. And underlying this assumption is another concern and assumption, really, that low-income patients' limited technological literacy hinders their understanding of the actual risk and benefits of mobile technology. In wanting to question these assumptions, I brought up these questions of, do we really know that? Have we asked patients directly what they think and what they know? And so I then looked into the literature and found virtually no data on security and privacy standards within the research community for mHealth interventions targeted to vulnerable populations, which is unsurprising and sad given the underrepresentation of low-income, racial, and ethnic minority groups in mental health and digital health research. And so this led me to wanting to talk about bringing equity to cybersecurity research in healthcare. This is a framework that I'm using to explain how motivated and directed this study. These are some of the framing questions that I brought up, and that really helped to shape the scope and the direction of the study. Who are our patients? How can we center their perspectives on these topics? How can we reframe our orientation that tends to be deficit-oriented and prescriptive as researchers to one that acknowledges the strengths, knowledge, and and resiliency factors of patients? And how can we take a participatory approach to designing cybersecurity solutions that are responsive to their needs? And so to be more concrete about the study, really quickly, the objective was to describe the knowledge and attitudes toward the privacy and security of health and personal data of safety net patients, and to get some information that on their opinions and understandings of the risk and benefits and the decision-making processes that they use to when using digital health interventions and electronic health records. We specifically asked patients about location tracking by smartphone apps, about their opinions on existing privacy and security protections, like privacy policies, passwords, and identification processes, and then broader perceptions on health data ownership and sharing. This was a qualitative study with individual semi-structured interviews of 20 patients, 5 of whom were Spanish speakers. And we had completed data analysis following thematic coding process of the interview data, following these 7 themes that I'm oversimplifying the process, of course, because we did a code book and we did multiple iterations, multiple versions of the code book among the team members. We followed a theoretical approach, but this is just an oversimplification. And these are some of the main findings. We have not published, but we're in the process of writing a manuscript. And the findings are that privacy and security concerns, as confirmed in the literature, are very contextual, and that some of the most important aspects or factors that influence current perceptions of security and privacy concerns are previous experiences with negative experiences with security breaches and the like. Perhaps more localized to the context of this study is that trust in the medical community is a critical factor. Surprisingly, location tracking is a major concern for many patients. There's a huge influence on human relations and social processes in privacy and security decision making. And then importantly, privacy and security policies and practices are highly onerous for patients. In fact, they often talked about how passwords and dual identification processes hinder their confidence and their willingness to engage with technology in healthcare. And lastly, but not least, the meaning of digital literacy is not just about technical knowledge, but there's a huge role in cultural and historical context that plays a role in the digital literacy of this patient population. And lastly, the implications of this research are many, but some of the most important ones is that marginalized communities do have strong opinions about cybersecurity. After all, they're current or very interested users of digital health products. So it's very important to expand who gets to participate in the design of cybersecurity solutions. It's important to think about engaging with these populations, not in us designing around them, but designing with them, or not designing down on them, but designing around them and with them. So in doing that, we hope to center and respond to the opinions and needs for improved cybersecurity practices and policies, which can helpfully contribute to the integration of technology in clinical settings, and ideally help ameliorate some of the health disparities that we see. And lastly, this research can help to add more nuance on the environmental and social aspects and processes that needs to be that so right now are lacking from mainstream privacy theories, which tend to focus on cognitive decision-making processes, so more on the personal level. Okay, that's all I have for today. I look forward to your feedback and comments and questions. And again, thank you for joining me today. This is a team at Berkeley and at UCSF. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. And I'll ask you to join me quickly for any quick questions. And we have a great question here at the top. Can you speak more about how privacy and security policies were onerous for patients? Did they get implemented in ways that were too confusing, require tech access that wasn't readily available to the patients, something else?
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me all right? Yes.
Yep.
Yes, but by that I mean that many patients reported having to, for instance, remember passwords and perform the dual factor authentication process was too onerous. It took too much time from their daily lives. It was hard to remember passwords. Many of the constraints that we all have already as regular technology users. But for this population of patients, it's particularly difficult to follow those processes because they were not developed according to their needs. Many of them have low literacy or have cognitive difficulties because of their health conditions. Many of them have chronic health conditions. And so that's what I meant by being onerous, really about being able to use these technologies, apps and websites that require them to go through this firewall of protection for their privacy and security, when really they want to just use the product. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm afraid I have to keep us moving to keep to schedule here, but I do see another question in the Q&A if you wouldn't mind taking a look at that. Perhaps you can type an answer out. I see it got an upvote as well. But thank you so much. Appreciate your talk today. All right, and next up we have Jessica Newman.
Hi, everyone. It is really great to be with you for this research exchange. My name is Jessica Newman, and I am a research fellow at CLTC, as well as the program lead for our AI security initiative. My talk today is about some research that was recently published in the Brookings text stream. In this work, I sought to answer the following question: how do different stakeholders' goals for explainable AI vary, and are any of those goals being realized in practice? This question is timely because the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is currently developing definitions and standards for AI explainability that will help shape the AI practices throughout the country. The AI Security Initiative is also engaging with NIST on its development of an AI risk management framework, and we expect that explainability techniques will play an important risk mitigation role in that work. To quickly provide some background, a lot of AI technologies are considered to be black boxes, meaning there is not sufficient understanding of how and why a model provides the outputs that it does. Explainability is supposed to help and is broadly defined as machine learning techniques that make it possible for human users to understand, trust, and manage AI. Explainability has become a core principle of responsible AI development that is referenced in hundreds of AI strategies. It also plays an important role in the realization of other core principles such as fairness and safety, because if you don't know how a model works, it is extremely difficult to mitigate biased or harmful outcomes. So we are pinning a lot of hopes on the idea of explainability. But what I wanted to know was just how much variation there is in what those hopes entail and whose aspirations are being prioritized. So I first reviewed explainability research and publications from a wide range of different stakeholders, and I did find significant variation. But I also found that 3 domains emerged that had greater consistency, including engineering, deployment, and governance. I don't have time here to delve into them, but I'll highlight some of the similarities and differences. The commonality across the domains was that explainability should provide assurance about the effectiveness and appropriateness of a system at achieving its intended task. Notable differences included that only the engineering domain treated AI systems as constantly in flux and capable of regular improvement, while the other domains expected greater consistency to inform expectations and enable adherence with policies. Only the governance domain stressed the values of human agency and safeguarding against algorithmic bias. Another important difference is that all of the domains imagine different feedback loops. In the engineering domain, it is engineers' input that's incorporated. In the deployment domain, it is users' input that is incorporated. Only in the governance domain is the impact on communities and the technology's relation to the broader world taken into consideration. These findings made it clear that just because different stakeholders are using the same word doesn't mean they are trying to achieve the same goals. So I next wanted to see whether any of these aspirations are being realized in the real world. To do this, I reviewed several studies of how organizations are using explainable AI. The largest study, which surveyed the practices of 20 organizations, found that the vast majority of explainable AI efforts are being used internally to support engineering goals and are not being used to provide greater transparency with users or other external stakeholders. The study found that explainability techniques are primarily used as sanity checks for engineers to see how their model is working and to identify inaccurate correlations. Other studies explained that organizations struggle to share explanations externally due to their needs to protect proprietary data and to provide users with seamless integration. They also showed that organizations don't have sufficient incentives to share information about the weaknesses of their models. These studies reveal that despite the diversity of people involved in the debates about AI, engineering priorities are being placed ahead of other considerations in practice, and that explainability is currently failing to meet the needs of users, external stakeholders, and impacted communities. This matters because it means that for now, users and other external stakeholders are afforded little, if any, insight into the behind-the-scenes workings of the AI systems that impact their lives and opportunities. This results in an asymmetry of knowledge about how an AI system works and the power to do anything about it. In the paper, I provide 5 recommendations aimed to reduce this asymmetry. The first is to clarify and diversify explainability objectives. Organizations should be explicit about their explainability goals. The second is to establish explainability metrics. These should take into account the specific contexts, needs, and norms in a given case. The third recommendation is to mitigate the risks involved with explainability, such as privacy risks, as they can be used to infer information about the model or training data. The fourth recommendation is to prioritize user needs. For example, by focusing on the context of an explanation, communicating uncertainty associated with model predictions, and enabling user interaction and accessibility. The fifth and final recommendation is that we should not treat explainability as though it is enough to actually enable trust in AI. Explainability will only result in trust alongside testing, evaluation, and accountability measures that not only uncover, but also mitigate exposed problems. So why does any of this matter? Well, the prevalence of bias and vulnerabilities in AI models means that trust is unwarranted without sufficient understanding of how a system works. Explainability could provide understanding about how a model behaves and where its use is appropriate. But there is a significant discrepancy between the vision of explainability as a principle that reaches across domains and works for diverse stakeholders and how it's being incorporated in practice. Without clear articulation of the objectives of explainability from different communities, AI is more likely to serve the interests of those already in power. By improving clarity about the diversity of explainability objectives, AI organizations and standards bodies can make explicit choices about what they are optimizing and why. AI developers can be held accountable for providing meaningful explanations and mitigating risks to the organization, to users, and to society at large. This is hugely important today, as women and people of color are disproportionately bearing the burdens of inaccurate AI systems. And it will only be more important in the future as AI systems are further integrated into critical infrastructure and society at large. I need to wrap up now, but please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Unfortunately, Jessica couldn't attend in person for the live Q&A, so we're going to go ahead and keep moving on. As you can see, we're a little behind schedule. Unfortunately, Nathan Malkin, our next researcher, is also unable to make it for the live Q&A, and we're not going to have time to view his lightning talk today. But as soon as we queue up and conclude this event, I will be able to send all of these great lightning talks in an email to all of you registered participants. So apologies that we can't view it now, but you will have it in your inbox later today so you can view Nathan's great work. A big thank you to all of the researchers for sharing their research today. I know this is extremely difficult to do in 5 minutes, and also thank you to the audience for such thoughtful questions throughout these past couple hours. I am now going to quickly pass things back over to Anne Cleveland, who's going to help us tee up our final panel for today. So Anne, back over to you.
Thank you. So please join me in giving another round of applause to our presenters. Thanks everybody so much. And as Rachel said, we're going to turn now to our illustrious panel on how leaders generate and use cybersecurity foresight. But before we do that, we had to take advantage of this opportunity when we have this whole community gathered virtually to celebrate the moderator of the panel and CLTC's founding director, Steve Weber. For anyone who hasn't seen this week's news posting at the School of Information and CLTC, Steve has announced he will be retiring from Berkeley in December after over 30 years of service. I hope each of you will get a chance to congratulate Steve in person on his new life, as he's calling it, and remind him how much he'll be missed. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to share a short tribute to celebrate Steve, graciously offered by Kelly Bourne, the program officer for the Hewlett Foundation Cybersecurity Initiative, and a longtime friend and colleague of Steve in the Center.
Hello, I'm Kelly Bourne, Director of the Cyber Initiative at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and I'm glad to be here today to offer a few words to celebrate Professor Steve Weber, Faculty Director of UC Berkeley's Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, or CLTC. Back in 2014, when the Hewlett Foundation first decided to commit millions of dollars to the urgent challenge of cybersecurity, Steve was a key thought partner. And during his career up to that point, Steve had worked with more than 100 companies and government agencies to develop scenario planning as a discipline for strategic decision-making. And Steve's vision for CLTC was an outgrowth of this unique experience, as Steve understood that cybersecurity, in his memorable words, was the master problem of the internet age, and that it is a constantly evolving challenge that requires both foresight, and long-term thinking. And so Steve pictured CLTC as a future-focused hub for research and dialogue for private and public decision makers in the field, one that would provide critical foresight to industry and NGOs, and that would expand who could participate in and benefit from cybersecurity. Steve's vision for CLTC persuaded the Hewlett Foundation to invest $15 million at UC Berkeley. And in the 7 years since, Steve has made CLTC a truly multidisciplinary center of cybersecurity expertise. And CLTC remains one of the anchor grantees in Hewlett's cyber initiative. Steve understood before so many of us that this field desperately needed investment, and he has been a central figure from the very beginning. Part of his legacy will be helping to put cybersecurity education on the map. As a professor at the UC Berkeley School of Information, he helped establish the new Masters in Information and Cybersecurity degree program. The best way that we can honor Steve is by continuing to support and advance this work. So on behalf of the Hewlett Foundation, thank you and congratulations, Steve.
Wow, that is so gracious. And I'm so grateful for the kind words. The only thing I can say is that it sounds kind of trite to say it, but I never could have done anything that we had done at CLTC without the team of people who have joined me from the beginning and the support we had from the School of Information, the Hewlett Foundation, Berkeley campus overall. It has been a really, really great run and probably the best 7 years of my life for sure. So it's just great to be able to sort of wrap that around with a panel talking a little bit about the challenges of foresight and what it really means to be effective at foresight in a world that is racing ahead of us faster than any of us can kind of keep up. I think just we should start by acknowledging we're living through some crazy times. The COVID pandemic that has kept us virtual, maybe it's trending down, but the ransomware pandemic sure ain't pending down right now. Even just in the last week, I mean, obviously we've seen a set of scrutiny of revelations at one of the world's largest and most sophisticated technology firms, but it sort of put in the background the fact that there was a massive outage at that firm on Monday. No one's fault, just a kind of a maintenance error, and could have easily been an attack, but it shows us that the digital sort of landscape, the digital ecosystem may not be quite as robust, even at the very top of the pinnacle as we think it is. And just yesterday, of course, if folks haven't heard about it, incredible breach, maybe I shouldn't call it a breach, at a company called Twitch, owned by another one of the world's most sophisticated technology companies, which basically had its entire code base stolen and posted online. So not a data breach. This isn't the next like privacy leak. This is the entire code base, all the intellectual property, basically the entire business. That's the world we're living in. And when we started CLTC, I guess it's now about 7 years ago, we sensed in our early listening tours with talking to folks around the industry, talking to folks in government, talking to folks in academia, this urgency, this feeling that we were operating a little bit like, I like to say, like emergency department physicians, just trying to kind of deal with whatever comes in the door that day, limited resources, try to patch it up, get it working again, send it back out for somebody else to take care of the long-term problem. But there really often wasn't anyone else out there to take care of the long-term problem. And so, as Kelly said, we wanted to develop a foresight perspective so that maybe we could get out ahead a little bit of that emergency mindset. And I think one of my key learnings and the things that most importantly motivates the conversation today is that as interesting and as academically challenging and as fun as developing foresight can be, it's hard. What's really hard is getting decision makers to act on foresight in the midst of that emergency department landscape. And so we wanted to bring together a couple of folks who are sort of sitting at the nexus of that challenge in different parts of the world, different parts of the industry, and learn from them what they've been able to discover about that challenge as they've worked that problem now for years. So I want to introduce our three panelists. The first is Dr. Alyssa J. Abdullah, who I understand goes by Dr. J, which is fantastic. Currently MasterCard's Deputy Chief Security Officer. She leads the emerging corporate security solutions team and is responsible for protecting MasterCard's information assets and driving the future of security at that company. So you can just imagine what that job is like on a day-to-day basis. We also have Derek Mankey. Derek joins us from FortiGuard Labs at Fortinet. He leads FortiGuard Labs' global threat intelligence team and works with leading CISOs and CTOs across Fortune 500 companies around the world, multiple industries. You can imagine what Derek's day job is like. And then finally, we have Claire Vishik, who joins us from Intel. She's a fellow and GMT CTO at Intel. Her work focuses on hardware security, trusted computing, privacy enhancing technologies, artificial intelligence, cryptography, and related global policy issues. So you can imagine what Claire's day-to-day job is like as well. And thank you all three for joining us for this conversation. I want to start by just giving you each opportunity to tell us a story. Academics are always being overly analytical and trying to look for generalizations and big theories and stuff like that. But much of what we try to do actually depends on our day-to-day experience of trying to get our work done. So it'd be great to hear from each of you a story, a personal anecdote about a tough and unanticipated challenge that you faced in your respective jobs and the lessons that you learned that helped inform how you try to see and mitigate future cybersecurity challenges. In particular, things that sometimes, come on your radar screen and you see, but yet aren't at the center of other people's or your organization's radar screen. How do you get the C-suites, the boards, to pay attention to this stuff? Dr. J, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. And congratulations, Steve, to you. And thank you for your work with the center and everything that you've done for UC Berkeley. So first, let me start out by saying that I'm going to kind of twist the question just a little bit, because as a African-American female in a male-dominated industry and a male-dominated field, I've always had personal anecdotes about unanticipated challenges. So I'll start out, I'll kind of talk about just really quickly my life. I'm going to talk about an unanticipated challenge in my life and how it actually relates to cybersecurity. I started out as a radio DJ. I wanted to be a radio DJ. I was a DJ at a jazz station, at an urban hip hop station when I was really, really, really young. Urban hip hop first and then a jazz station. And I went to college, and everyone, they have this idea of who you are and what you come with just through, looking and talking and presentation and all of that. And my English professor said, you're not an English major. You really aren't. And you're not a mass communications major. So you need to give up the whole DJ thing. And she was right. And my math teacher said, you're truly a mathematician. You're a mathematician at heart. You've got this. And they sized me up really, really well. But what I will say is, as they thought that they knew me and knew what I wanted to do, and I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do a lot of public speaking, but my English teacher told me, radio and TV was not in my future, and that I needed to figure that out. What it taught me really was what you think is may not always be what it is. And that has kind of carried me throughout my career, throughout dealing with diversity challenges. And I think about that in cybersecurity. We always think in a box. And I'll talk about this a little bit later in our conversation today too. But we grow up thinking in boxes that things have to fit a certain way, that you have to go through a certain path to get somewhere. And I will tell you, the adversary doesn't have 25 years of cybersecurity experience with degrees and all of these other things added on to it. And so we have to kind of think differently about how we want to attack the adversary or defend our own networks and infrastructures if we want to win in the cyber war. So that's just really briefly.
Really interesting. Derek, tell us an interesting story that you can share with us about how you overcome some of these challenges or confront them.
Yeah, sure thing, Steve. And I also want to echo the congratulations to yourself. And from everything I've seen, I know you're going to be surely missed there. And anyone in this field, you know, we always need good people, Steve, as you know. So, and that's something I wanted to talk about. Actually, it's part of the challenges. You know, myself, I've been following threat intelligence and cybercrime for over 20 years. I actually started my career and journey as a malware analyst or reverse engineer, looking at the weapons, if you will. So, you know, the direct front lines and the impact. And it was a very different threat landscape 20 years ago. And, you know, back then it was just a matter of a reactive operational model, the proverbial cat and mouse game, right? We saw a threat, we added a signature, we protected against it. That was our focus. And I actually built a lot of distributed computing cluster systems that are in production today, and they're still relevant, but it was just one piece back then, right? And that it was sort of a tunnel vision focus in the industry. That's what we were looking at, and just focusing on, you know, let's protect against 1 million pieces of malware, 5 million pieces of malware. That number ballooned, right? Because as the attack surface expanded exponentially. And one of the things that we started to see, and, you know, myself, we were thinking with a vendor hat on, but what we didn't really anticipate was how quickly this has evolved on the cyber criminal ecosystem end, right? We were just busy looking at the weapons, right? And effectively building a bigger fortress. Every day we would build a bigger fortress, put more bricks on the wall, and call it a day and hope that it wasn't going to break. And what we started to quickly see was that, you know, cyber criminals, it wasn't just that, you know, the typical image of a hacker in the basement operating, right? It has evolved into full-blown operations, very, very much a mirror image of legitimate business operations, affiliate models, the CAAS, a crime as a service model. And just where that is today, I didn't anticipate that to be there. Definitely not that quick. And so it really forced us to rethink threat intelligence. Instead of just looking at the weapons and the indicators, wait a minute, we need to back up with foresight and look at, you know, really thinking like a cyber criminal, right? Examining those business units of them. We know that these are the weapons coming up, right? That we're being hit with. What do their factories look like, right? How are these people connected? And what's their strategy and tactics and thinking, right? And that's, you know, we always talk about cybercrime having no borders, and nowadays verticals and sectors have no borders, because we're actively seeing ransomware attacks on you know, cross-sector almost equally, right? It's not just about finance as an example anymore. So these are the challenges, but you know, with the Foresight now, we've really switched our model of threat intelligence to yes, we still have all that distributed clusters in place, the automation. We've built machine learning and AI models to effectively handle those mundane tasks. But now, as you know, we're faced with a skills gap. And we're really focusing on looking at the TTPs, the techniques, tactics, procedures of cyber criminals, interoperating too, right? So that foresight, we've needed to take that outside of our wheelhouse as a vendor and actually work in the industry. So I'm talking about private to private sector, private to public sector, academia as well, how we can all work together to address that problem.
Thanks, Derek. Claire, I understand you might be having some trouble with video, but if you can hear us.
I can hear and see everyone, but I cannot display my own video. If everyone can hear me, then we are fine.
We can.
Yeah. Excellent discussion. Thank you for the invitation. To me, the most interesting part of cybersecurity now is how broad it is, how connected it is with all kinds of problems. This might be driven a little bit by the fact that like the two previous panelists, my road to cybersecurity and security in general was not direct. It was not premeditated. I was studying math, and actually originally was a double major in the European linguistics. And in graduate school, I saw a little ad flopping in the wind for a position that had nothing to do with security, but that ended up because of a series of circumstances that were completely unexpected, making a cryptographer out of me, and then leading into cybersecurity. So coming into security from a range of other areas. I have done economic modeling, I have done hardware design, I have done network planning when I was in AT&T Labs, shows to me how fragmented the field is and how broad its influences. I will give you a few examples, and all of them are at the intersection of privacy, cybersecurity, policy, and technology. A very obvious example is the connection of cybersecurity with areas that we don't perceive as security. For instance, at some point, a very popular, if I can say so, cyber attack was the one that affected the energy management on your device. Essentially, the energy was automatically set up at the maximum, draining your machine very quickly and making it difficult to operate, sort of a mini denial of service attack. It didn't have a direct connection to what we perceive as security, but it affected the availability of the platform and the security of other services associated with it. And another example that I would like to put forward is a lot of writings, discussions, debates that we had, maybe 13 years ago about the connection between RFID and tracking. This is a valid concern, but the majority of RFID tags that were under discussion at the time were the passive tags that have about 1 millimeter range for the signal. So it would be necessary to track a person with shoes that have an RFID, with shoes that have RFID tags. It would be necessary to pave the roads with meters and with readers. This, of course, is not possible. It's much less expensive to have a team of people following this person everywhere. But there were significant ramifications in the policy space, in the area of interest space, that actually made RFID more vulnerable for a while because it detracted from the areas where the real privacy concerns, the real security vulnerabilities were located. So I think when we are talking about cybersecurity in the new environment where we have anything from edge clouds to artificial intelligence to micro devices and even systems of systems beginning to emerge like smart cities, it's impossible to talk about cybersecurity without understanding how the systems work and what effect they have on society. So working truly at the intersection of these two areas is very important, and I commend this center for doing just this.
Thank you so much, Claire. You know, each of you have raised about 10 different interesting points that I would like to dig into, but I'll probably only have time maybe to dig into one or two with each. So I want to go back to you, Dr. J. Just kind of reflect on the fact that you've all sort of had indirect pathways into this field. It's one of the things that we discovered with great interest and great excitement when we launched our master's program, that like the people who were coming back for more training to become professional cybersecurity operators, leaders, CISOs, had the most unbelievably diverse background. And it was sort of like, what's going on here? And second, we sort of realized, well, that actually is functional for the kinds of jobs and kinds of challenges that you face. Dr. J, you brought up this question of, like, I call it the intersection between iron cages, the notion of a bureaucracy whose essence is to have rules and procedures and boxes and reporting requirements and dashboards and digital networks that sort of try to root around all that kind of stuff. One of the things that we've talked about a lot and increasingly in the last couple of years has been the value of a diverse workforce in trying to make those two things a little bit less friction filled. And it would be great to hear some of your thoughts or about your experience and your just kind of general view of like, how important is diversity in that equation, and how can we get better at it?
Of course, diversity is super important. It goes without saying, but let me double click a little bit on why. And I teased a little bit of it earlier when I said, the adversary is not in a box. The adversary is not having a panel on diversity and introducing, how do we fill these jobs with more diverse skill sets and all of that. That's not how it works. And we on for lack of any better term, we on the right side of cybersecurity, as opposed to the wrong side of cybersecurity, we on the right side of cybersecurity are used to processes, procedures, plans, things fitting the way they're supposed to fit, science happening organically the way it's supposed to happen. But the adversary has taken that and said, come one, come all. If you have a thought, if you have an opinion, if you have an idea, and this is why the adversary is able to pivot very quickly and move very fast. And we have to be able, I'm not saying we should strip away the processes and policies and procedures. We cannot do that. But we can't continue to sit with the brain power that we have and say, well, based on my beliefs and based on how I grew up and based on how I think, Stephen and Derek should think the same way. We just can't do that. And when we do that, that is how we continue to miss the adversary hitting us in all of these different directions. The adversary now coming out with, and now I think a new challenge will be fooling us with synthetic IDs, and deep fakes are going to take off and all of these type of things. So we have to really not just have a discussion about diversity. And then when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about diversity, inclusion, equity. I'm talking about neurodiversity too, because guess what? No one is exempt from the adversary. The adversary is attacking everyone. So my belief is, as well as, there should not be gender, we should not have gender or age discrimination in it at all. They're attacking, senior citizens differently than they're attacking millennials. And we need to hear that. We need to hear that from a lot of different perspectives. And if not, then the solutions that we build are going to be difficult for everyone to accept and learn how to use those solutions. When we talk about, how does my mom or my grandma use social media? We can't overcomplicate it and bear it down with too much stuff because of how we think that we haven't allowed an opportunity for it to be accepted by all. And that's when you have the diversity challenges, when you don't consider neurodiversity, when you don't consider equity and all of these other themes, then you really have a one-sided solution.
Mm-hmm. Derek, let me kick that over to you with a slightly different trajectory. So here we are, we've got the high science tools, we've got great technology, and then we've got the kinds of challenges that Dr. J just pointed to of how that stuff actually manifests when it gets down into a big bureaucracy or, my grandmother's social media feed. And that's really exciting. And you're in a situation of trying not just to kind of unravel that as it looks today, but again, as you said, pointing, 2-3 years to the future, where we're in the realm of what's called known unknowns. So how do you do that at a company like Fortinet, which is also at the same time being held to quarterly earnings?
Yeah, great question. And first of all, I'd like to take my pen and underscore that statement that Dr. J just said on the adversarial agility. It's a big issue that we face today. In fact, I did a presentation at RSA conference. It was about 2 years ago on the accelerating attack chain, the weaponization of offensive automation, and now even machine learning models that we're seeing, because we're always a target as a vendor. So when we look at, the classic matrix, right? The known knowns and the known unknowns first. That's what we're very good at. I have the benefit of having over 7 million sensors deployed worldwide, a great data science team, plowing through that information, normalizing that information. We issue, biannual reports. We just issued one last month on the first half of 2021. And this is across the attack surface. We have good visibility on that. So I'm able to see malware movement, exploit vulnerability movement, botnets, command and control systems, all of, again, more of the kill chain, right, of attacks. And that's the known knowns. That's what we're seeing. We understand. That's easy to report on. That's easy to make it to rank in terms of threats and prioritization when it becomes a board level discussion. And it's all those things that we do when we create these guides. The other part of that is the known unknowns, of course, right? So these are the things we see, but we don't fully understand yet. And this is where we engage with our threat research capabilities to do that deeper digging, the threat hunting, the reverse engineering on it. And that really paints a good picture of where we're at today. But we pivot on that, right? We're able to take what we know today on the, finding a patient zero, as we call it, the 0 days when we're uncovering this. So we see it, we don't know it. When we find information about that, we're actually able to uncover and unmap more information about the adversary, right? Typically, we're finding things like beta programs that they're creating that's not public yet, right? So those are the things that we're not seeing yet, but we're starting to understand, the unknown knowns. And so that's our approach to that. And actually, Steve, every year we sit down annually to look at our best guess, educated guesses based off of all of the known knowns and the known unknowns. So that baseline trend that we're building, we look at that and we see, okay, based off of this, where's their technology going, right? Again, we actually build a roadmap for them. We don't release it to them, but we're building this internally so we can understand and anticipate where they're going to be. And we actually categorize that, by a 1 to 2 year outlook and then a 2 to 5 year outlook. And largely that 2 to 5 year outlook, when we're getting closer towards that 5 years, of course, that gets into the realm of the unknowns, which is, of course, the most difficult. But really, that's the way that we approach it. We sit down every quarter also and review those because it's, those trends actually do start to become realities and shift. And we're also starting to use not just, we've built a sort of OSI model to this, right, where we have at the bottom of the stack, automation, machine learning, and AI. That was on the reactive part before. Finding the threats, the patient zero problem, all of that. We're actually working on some really cool projects in the industry, right? EPSS is one of them, exploit prediction scoring system. This is with first.org. So we're actually using all that data to do predictive modeling now off vulnerabilities and exploits, right? Where we see them going, how can we create early warning systems to get ahead of the curve, as an example, too, just like weather forecasting from the, when a hurricane is approaching. So that's our approach. Never a boring day, like I said, but it's a vast problem, as you know, Steve. It's we can't boil the ocean. That never works. So we're always looking at one thing at a time and really building off those existing trends we have.
Super interesting, Derek. It gives so much texture to something that we always talk about. I mean, everyone in the field talks about that this is a race that just keeps accelerating. And the minute you think you have something locked down, you find out that you probably don't, or there's another way around it. And I have a lot of colleagues who would really like to join those quarterly meetings that you folks have. So if you don't invite us, maybe we'll try to break in. Let me go to Claire. Claire, probably you're facing similar kinds of challenges from a different perspective. One of the world's most important, let's call it digital ecosystem infrastructure providers, if you think about the chip as at the base of everything we do, but also a business perhaps a little bit unlike Derek's and Dr. J's, that is one of the more capital intensive businesses in the world. How does it look from your perspective?
It looks Interesting. Every company offers a different picture, and all kinds of high-level initiatives on cybersecurity that I have participated in different geographies, the US, Europe, or even Australia, they always come to the same conclusion. There isn't one size that fits everyone. Every market segment and every organization have to adjust to what works the best for them, what's the most efficient. There are many parameters there, resources, expertise, the nature of business, the nature of preparedness. There are, of course, cross-cutting issues that are true for everyone, yet there isn't one size of, features or activities that would cover everything, all kinds of issues that every company faces when we are talking about cybersecurity. So Intel is interesting in that our products enable everything, all the digital infrastructure, yet our products are not directly customer facing. Our customers are the ones that build systems, or even the ones who build subsystems. And it is them, or even companies that work with them. Think about, Intel working with something like a company like HP and providing infrastructure for Google. So we always are mediated in the products that we provide, yet because our component is so essential, it also is always in the forefront. So there is this pressure that becomes greater and that we make incredible efforts to respond to as attacks become more sophisticated. We are somewhat mediated from some types of attacks because considering the nature of the processors, all attacks on processors work better, or most attacks work better in physical proximity when there is a physical connection to the device. But of course, we are also responsive to our customer problems. The customer implementations that we have affect what we have, and our direct customers affect our indirect customers. As a result, very complex processes were put together, such as multi-party secure vulnerability disclosure and mediation processes that allow us to keep a stable infrastructure. Us, I mean everyone, the society, and that allows Intel and other companies to respond as quickly as possible in as coordinated a way as possible to all kinds of threats. On the other end of the spectrum, there is also, as Derek mentioned, this optimistic part of the picture. We get more and more tools, many of them actually driven by the increased computational power that allow us to look at the problems in a much more sophisticated context. A lot of things can be done in terms of building secure products, responding to cybersecurity threats in this new environment. Cybersecurity was mentioned already, as something that benefits from these technologies and responds to them directly. For instance, artificial intelligence is making forays into all kinds of industrial productions, including the factory floor, allowing manufacturers to work much more efficiently. It also allows us to evaluate threats in a much more efficient manner. It allows our customers to be more responsive, to be more understanding of the environment around them. And there are a lot of other technologies, not necessarily driven by artificial intelligence, but always driven by increasing computing power. sector. We are working with a number of researchers that really bring innovation to this space. Areas of automation that are almost commercially ready abound today. They are such areas as creating threat models automatically, creating technical requirements automatically based on those threat models, finding and fixing bugs automatically based on the two other parameters that I mentioned. This even though the race with the attackers continues to intensify, this gives those in the forefront of these automation efforts some level of advantage, because there are more things you can see, things you can fix quickly, and so on. So it's always, people and technology.
We just have a couple more minutes, so I want to ask one more quick question and give you each 1 minute to respond, no more. And it's a very self-serving question from the perspective of an academic institution. We like to ask ourselves sometimes, what will 3 years from now folks look at us and say, why weren't you working on this stuff 3 years ago when we needed you to be doing the basic research that would help us deal with the threats that we're now facing in, I guess we'd be talking 2024. So if you could give us one problem that CLTC could make progress on over the next couple of years, that in 2024, so you don't have to say, why weren't those people working on it back then? What is it we should be focused on?
You're gonna think I'm crazy about mentioning this, so just bear with me. You ever had that loaf of bread in the back of the pantry that you forgot about, and then you open it up like weeks later and you're like, what is that fuzzy green thing in the back left side of the pantry? I think our satellite systems are going to be the same way. We have 3,170 inactive satellites. I think if we don't figure out a way to make sure that there's still security around those, the dark web is going to migrate into our satellite systems, and the adversary is going to own a lot of those inactive satellites. That's my view.
Digital space junk, as it were.
Yes.
Derek.
All right. First of all, I agree. That's a very interesting subject. And we are actually looking at SATCOM threats, base stations, and there's threats knocking on those doors today. I can tell you that. So absolutely agree. Really quickly within my minute, Steve, what I think we're going to be, so what we can work on now, what we need to get ahead of is solving the overconfidence in the industry. I think we just did a ransomware survey to over 455 organizations globally, mostly CXO decision makers. Ransomware is perceived as the #1 threat. They have a vast majority, according to our survey, 90 to 95% saying that they're very confident they could deal with a ransomware threat. But everything we read about in the news and see about paints a different story. I'm looking at the security stack. A lot of it is network-based and not security-focused right now. Things that should be at the top, like breach and attack simulation, deception technologies, all ZTNA, all these sorts of things are not. And it's a bad formula that's shaping up right now. And I think we need to get ahead of that. That comes with preparedness. In long story short, preparedness, education, helping with that skills gap, but really bringing the reality into focus, because the risk is much higher than the investment upfront for these things.
Super interesting. I think some people call it the Lake Wobegon phenomenon. Others refer to the observation that everybody thinks they're an above average driver. Same thing. And even after this much time. Claire, what do we need to do?
Two things in a minute. One is making security an integral part of computer science education. Even those developers that specialize in security will have to train to understand security as an integral feature of what they are doing when they write even the smallest piece of code. The second thing is also simple. everything these days becomes legacy technology in about 18 months. Creating a framework where we can understand the developer intent. We had a project that started looking at it, intent semantics for the developers, but it's broader than that. So understanding the developer intent will allow us to overcome a lot of issues in legacy systems that create concerns and develop additional vulnerabilities today. If this is resolved, probably 50% of issues will not be with us.
Very interesting. One of the things that we've always stuck to at CLTC is to try to start things and end things on time. And I want to respect that today. I do want to thank all three of you for engaging in this conversation. Sort of like the reason we have a research exchange is to exchange research and exchange ideas. And this is exactly the spirit in which I hope everybody appreciated the comments. Could have continued this conversation for a lot longer, and I hope one day we can do it in person. When I came to Berkeley 30 some odd years ago, this is exactly what I thought I'd want to be doing. And I'm so glad I got the chance to do it with the three of you today and with my colleagues from CLTC. So Rachel, any last words before we sign off?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Steve. And thank you once again, Derek, Dr. J, and Claire for joining us for this really interesting conversation. I'm going to finish this out here, and a couple of things before we sign off today. First, just one final thank you to all of the speakers and the panelists that participated today and made this such a rich discussion. We'd also like to give a special shout out and thank you to our community partners, our foundation supporters, whose contributions and collaboration are so crucial to advancing the work of CLTC. We also want to recognize our corporate membership partners who invest in CLTC's mission, and our original future-focused cybersecurity research. And finally, a very special thank you to everyone out in the audience for tuning in and asking some very thoughtful questions and engaging with us today. We hope you'll stay in touch. At the bottom of the screen here, you can find CLTC's contact information. If you have any questions about the research presented today, or would just like to get in touch with us or any of the presenters or panelists that you saw today, please email us at cltc@berkeley.edu, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered and get you in touch with the right folks. Also, if you haven't already, please follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and do sign up for the CLTC newsletter, which you can do right from the homepage of our website. And that's a great way to stay informed of upcoming events, research announcements, such as the opening of our fall 2021 request for proposals. So for any UC Berkeley graduate students still on the line, if you're interested in doing some grant research and looking for funding for the 2022 academic year, please visit our website or email cltc@berkeley.edu for more information. All right, folks, that's a wrap. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and we hope to see you or hear from you again soon. Take care.